G Charlie, Tower 718, responding personal injury collision, response, Georgia Avenue and Kayson Street, 1842.
Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to today's episode of From the Command Post. We're live here from the Command Lab at the Public Safety Training Academy. I'm Battalion Chief Mark Davis, and as always, pleasure to have everybody signed into the YouTube chat and watching on YouTube. Remember, if you are looking for COPDI credit, that we're now recording all that on the Academy's website through the COPDI hours entry form. So today's 1 hour episode is going to be dedicated to a vehicle collision that occurred several weeks ago, probably a couple months ago now at this point, up in Company 25's area. Ended up being a lot of resources being used, and we ended up having a command structure built out, so we're going to talk about that. Before we do that, I want to go back to folks that would have watched the Company 8 house fire where they talked about the rescue maid, vent enter search. And one of the things that came up out of that was talking about physically fit, right? Being fitness is an important part of your job. And those folks from that tower that went upstairs, they talked about having to find that person and get that person out over top of that window seal and all that, right? So fitness is an important part. You learn it in recruit school. Hopefully that maintains throughout the course of your career or your duty assignment at whatever volunteer station you participate in. Want to recognize two folks who recently did really well in some fitness stuff. One is Lieutenant Andrea Sujapan. She took second place in the the World Police and Fire Games in CrossFit back in July, August. So congratulations on that. She traveled to Canada to do that, represented us very well. And Kevin Carroll, firefighter out of 25 on the B shift. He did a great job, took second place in the strongman competition in the state of Maryland, and he qualified for nationals. So I think those two folks take their fitness pretty seriously, and you know who else should? You, because the public out there is depending on that. And when you need to grab grandma out of the second floor of that house, you need to be ready to do that. But today we're talking about From the Command Post, some EMS stuff, mass casualty stuff, vehicle collision. Can get started right away. It's going to be Chief Cooper, who is going to serve as our moderator. So turning that over to Chief Cooper, and he'll take it from here. Chief.
Thanks. Oh, you guys? Okay.
Tower 718, responding personal injury collision, response, Georgia Avenue and Kayson Street, 1842. Tower 718.
Something to do, start my wagon in the slot.
Tower 718, you're getting your engine in the squad from Rescue 2. And Battalion 704.
Okay, thank you. I'll let you know what's going on here in a minute.
All right, thank you, sir. 1843.
Tower 18 Montgomery. But the units knew to take the wrong side. Kayson Georgia Avenue is completely blocked going northbound.
Paramedic engine 718, you okay? Wrong side of Kayson. Battalion 704, you okay?
Yeah, thanks. All right, Montgomery, I got it's a horrific scene here. Go ahead and switch to an alternate. I got one on fire, one trapped, one in the roadway. Start me a second and third transport unit and another ALS provider. Switch to arrive command.
Okay, switch to 7 Alpha 3. Attention units on the scene are responding. Georgia Avenue and Kayson Street, 7 Alpha 3. Units responding, take the wrong way on Kayson Street. Georgia Avenue is not accessible. Units switch to 7 Alpha 3. 1844.
Okay, we figured we'd give you a little bit of beginning audio to set the tone for the event. Before we get moving, I'll make my introduction. So, opposite of me is Chief Mark Dempsey, Rescue Company 2. Sitting next to Chief Dempsey is Battalion Chief Rob First, Battalion 1 in the C shift, who happened to be working as EMS 704 for that event. And then finally, Chief Russell Blankhorn, Battalion 2 on the B shift. So, introductions made. I think we're going to get right into it with Chief Blankhorn, who happened to be the incident commander on this event.
Yeah, so I was working Battalion 704 that day on overtime. This call happened right around dinner time. When the call was dispatched, I was actually in the shopping center there at Georgia and Connecticut getting dinner. Heard the call go out, heard it was just Tower 718 and an EMS unit, so I didn't think much of it. Grabbed my dinner, got back in the truck. As I was pulling out of the shopping center, I heard that transmission. Captain Myers say, based on the comments, start me, my engine, and a squad. So that piqued my interest. I pulled up the call on the MDC and saw what he saw was notes saying, report of now 1 trapped and 1 on fire. So I added myself to the call. Again, I was at Georgia and Connecticut. As soon as I made a right on southbound Georgia Avenue, I could see the column of smoke. And that was about the same time he was given that on-scene report of a horrific scene. So I knew that we had some work there. So I pulled up right as we were getting switched over to the alternate talk group. He gave another update regarding what he had, and I assumed command at that point.
Okay. So, when you heard his report as you were pulling up, right? Mm-hmm. What started going through your head? What were your needs? What were your wants? How do you want this thing to roll?
Yeah, so, we do the same thing on every car accident we go on, right? We figure out, okay, how many cars are involved? So what's going through my mind, the same thing on every car accident. How many cars I got involved? How many people are in each of these cars? How many of the people that are in these cars are hurt? Has anybody gotten out of the vehicles that are hurt? So how many patients do I have? What priorities are they? And then I'm looking at the units that I have. He's already requested some additional units, so I'm starting to jot those units down, starting to do some reconciliation. I know I have 2 people trapped in that pickup truck that got hit pretty hard. Actually, they were pinned. They were pinned pretty significantly. So I know the rescue squad's coming to handle that.
Actually, rewind for a second.
Yep.
So you had the pickup truck with 2 people pinned. Talk about the vehicles. How many, what were they, and occupants?
So directly in front of where I positioned, on the right-hand side of the screen, is a red pickup truck. It's pretty large, I think it was a F-350 Super Duty, 4-door. There were 4 people originally, I think 4, maybe 5, in this pickup truck. They were T-boned on the driver's side. The 2 passengers in the front were, the driver was pinned, and I believe I'll defer to Chief Dempsey here in a minute. He can probably further elaborate on the patients in the pickup truck. But they were priority, I think 1 and 2 at the time. Priority 1 and 2?
I think it was 1 and 2. Yeah.
1 and 2 traumas. In the pickup truck, that car right there in front of us there was the one that was on fire. That driver had already self-extricated upon 18's arrival. You get silver vehicle behind there, again, I think both of those drivers, I think there were two passengers in the silver vehicle. They had all left, so they were sitting on curbs. There was another vehicle, I think just south of here, that you couldn't see in the picture. But the big thing that this picture doesn't show, these pictures don't show, is the massive amount of people that were already gathering around the scene from the neighborhood. So you had people on both sides of the street intermingled with patients, right? So we're trying to figure out where are all the people that came out of these vehicles. Do they need help? And unfortunately, Captain Meyer can't be here today, but he was doing an excellent job going around and basically triaging the scene and figuring out how many patients that we had, trying to feed that information to me so I could start calling for the additional help that we needed.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so if I recall correctly, Chief Dempsey arrived to the scene shortly after?
Yeah, he got there pretty quickly, came up to my vehicle, asked me if I needed anything. At the time, I felt like all I was doing was reconciling units, writing down units. And in my mind, my objective was to basically, okay, where are my patients at? And I knew a lot of them were traumas because of the reports I was getting from Captain Meyer, and Chief First can probably elaborate on that in a minute. But it was escalating pretty quickly as far as the amount of traumas that I had. So I was calling for additional ALS resources faster than anything. And in the end, I ended up having 16 total units, five paramedic engines, 7 EMS units, a tower, a rescue squad, an ALS chase car. So a lot of units come to the scene pretty quickly. And my goal was to assign the ALS resources as they arrived to the priority patients that were scattered amongst this scene. And that's one of the problems we'll talk about here in a minute that I had, was as they were arriving, in my mind, I wanted to assign them to specific patients or specific vehicles. And before I could do that, they were being grabbed by other personnel in the scene, Captain Meyer and Chief First, being directed, which they were doing the right thing. I couldn't keep track of it as fast as it was happening. By the time I was assigning a unit, they were already wheeling a patient out to transport to the hospital. But yeah, to go back to your question, Chief Dempsey arrived pretty quickly. So I didn't feel I needed him in the vehicle at that time, and I knew that I had at least 2 victims trapped in that pickup truck. And seeing that his rescue squad was there, I assigned him as the rescue supervisor.
All right, so before we move on to that part of the event, 2 questions for you. When you arrived, was the car still on fire?
It was. They had done. 18 had done a pretty quick knock on it. It was still smoking. I don't want to say there was any active fire.
So did you have a full company committed to the car that was on fire? In other words, they couldn't be part of the other part of the operation because they were.
So Tower 18 had their hands full initially, right? You had 1 patient in the roadway. So let me step back. That red pickup truck was a roofing truck, right, with a roof rack full of ladders on it originally. So that roof rack and those ladders and shingles and nails and everything were scattered amongst the scene. And there was a patient in the middle of the roadway that was struck by some of that debris. So 18 was dealing with the patient there. They had 2 trapped in the pickup truck. They had that car on fire. Luckily, their engine got there pretty quickly and started, because there was no patient, there was nobody in the car that was on fire. It was a lower priority for them.
Okay.
But 18's engine got there pretty quickly and took care of the little fire that was in the engine compartment. So no, the car was handled pretty quickly.
Okay.
Considering everything else that was going on.
So let's move on to Chief Dempsey. I'd like to hear from you as far as what was going through your head as you were listening to the event on your way to the call.
All right.
What was your initial gut reaction when you first got there and saw what you saw, to the point where you were assigned as the extrication supervisor?
Right. So on the way to the call, I just made an assumption I'd get there first, because I didn't know Chief Blankhorn was out and about. So I was running through the same things he was in my mind about, priorities. The one thing about these incidents is, we don't run them that often. We don't have the framework that we have on a house fire, box alarm, where a lot of times the duty officer could not even show up, and that the crews will make it happen because they have that framework to work with. So that's always been a challenge running these calls. We don't do them that often, and it definitely has the ability to run away from you quickly. So that was going through my head. When I arrived on the scene, of course, command had been passed. I reported to the command post, and he had a pretty good feel of what was going on. Justin was doing an outstanding job relaying information back to the command post on a continual basis. I was assigned extrication. This was a case where, the extrication piece not being there first is ideal because that crew was able to get there and then focus on their assignment. If the squad gets there first or the extrication truck gets there first and they get scattered doing, patient evaluation care and whatnot, then that makes things difficult. So this worked out well that way. The person in the back seat eventually kind of unpinned himself, and he was extricated without our help. Person in the front, was looking to be a priority one, so the extrication was enough to get him out. And, that went pretty smooth. And then we reported back to the command post to see what the needs were. And, in Montgomery County specifically, we're blessed because, we just keep calling for stuff and it always comes. I can't remember a situation like this where we called for stuff and they're like, no, we ain't got it. So that's a big plus, being in a resource-rich jurisdiction like we have.
Okay. Anything complex to the extrication, or was it your standard?
No, given that we had pretty much determined him to be priority one, we needed to get him out. So the squad crew did just enough to get him out.
And what resources did he assign to you besides the rescue squad?
Just the rescue squad.
Okay.
So I had a 3-person squad coming, and then one of my captains responded in, the utility to give a hand, and that was helpful. Okay. Always, 4 is like the minimum that I'd like to have on an incident like that. And especially with, me being the extrication supervisor, then that officer can really focus on his job, and I provide that overall, big picture look.
Okay. So you went through a list of a significant amount of resources that you called for and received.
Yep.
So would you say, I want to talk about the resource-rich part of this event, right? Especially in that area, right? There's no such thing as a long response time over there. So at what point of the event did you have all those units there? How long, do you think? 20 minutes into it, you had everything there?
Yeah, I'd say probably 20, 25 minutes.
Okay.
I was probably calling for the last ambulance 15 minutes into the call.
Okay.
Just something which was a lesson learned we can talk about at the end.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the EMS units were getting there pretty quickly and grabbing whatever patient they were assigned and getting out pretty quickly. So that's one of the things that went really well with this event is how quickly units showed up and were back out of the scene.
And I think that's something that we as a whole take for granted, how lucky we are to be able to call for something and have it there immediately, right? Other parts of the county, but more so other parts of the country just don't have it as good as we have it when it comes to that.
Now, interesting enough, I've been looking at the surge emails as they come out virtually every day. And this corridor, when we do have a surge, it's like an acorn shape that starts at the DC line and runs all the way to Station 4.
Yeah.
So this probably would have run much differently if it had been in the middle of one of those surges where virtually all those units are gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the time of day also where the surges tend to start, right? So.
Yeah.
All right, so Chief first, let's move to you. Again, same thing, where were you, what were you doing, what was going through your mind? A battalion chief running as the EMS duty officer, right? To that event, priorities, what you saw when you got there, what you did when you got there, and where you started.
Okay. I was at Fire Station 18. We had finished dinner, and I was getting ready for taking over EMS 700. So I was actually settling in and building.
Multi-purpose.
Yeah, right. So I was settling in and building up my workstation in the EMS duty officer office so that I could take over EMS 700 when the engine was dispatched on the U-pick. I knew that I was going to have to go on that, so I got in the vehicle and headed north.
Why do you say that?
Well, first off, I didn't want to go to be EMS 700 right now. But, sorry, Ben.
Was there something on the radio?
I saw the amount of transport units going.
Okay.
Right? Because it was not just the engine. It was additional ALS resource. It was additional transport in the rescue squad, and it was right down the street. So I knew I was going to go on that one. I got in the vehicle, headed north, pulled up about the same time as the squad. There was a lot of transmissions going on, and I wasn't really listening to all that was happening because I was just trying to get to the scene with all the northbound traffic on Georgia Avenue being shut down. So the squad, myself, and the chief, we had some difficulty actually accessing the scene with the traffic. So I got there, put on my safety vest, grabbed a notepad and a pencil, and I started walking around. I self-assigned myself triage, which, thinking back on it, in hindsight, was not the best thing to do. I didn't know triage was already set up.
I was going to ask you that.
I didn't know that Tower 18 was already doing triage. I heard Captain Meyer requesting resources, but I didn't know that an entire scene survey had been done yet.
So you didn't do any face-to-face time with Tower 18's officer. You just went ahead and engaged, nor did you consult with the incident commander.
No, I did not consult with the incident commander. Sorry, blink. So, right. So I grabbed a notebook and a piece of paper. I'm sorry, a notebook and a pencil, and I started walking around. I didn't find Captain Meyer until later because we were both working counterclockwise around the incident, and he was ahead of me. So I just started grabbing information. Started with the truck. There were 2 patients in there. They were both immediate. So I got that their category or their priority based on start triage, kind of, right? I just knew that they were immediate and that they were adult males, right? And then moved around and then found the human being laying in the road, which I thought was the pedestrian struck because there was talk about pedestrians struck. So I got that person was immediate and also an adult male. Then I looked up into the gray car with the front end damage that was on fire, but not when I got there, and spent a few moments trying to figure out where that driver was. Turns out that a off-duty police officer, the park police officer in that picture right there, had reported to me that he took the driver out of this blue car with the front end damage and put him on the road because it was on fire. Because the car was on fire. Then I looked at the gray car and we tried to find those drivers, or the people in that car, and we didn't exactly know where they were immediately.
You said we. So you working with somebody else now?
No, I was talking to myself, so the two people, me and myself. So between everybody on the scene, I should say, so between the police officer, myself, and anybody else standing there, I'm like, where is this driver?
Gotcha.
And
so all the while, you're writing this stuff down,
right.
But you're not taking any action.
The action is writing it down, but right.
And your plan to take that document to bring it to the command post, or to what was the plan?
I wanted to make sure I had the correct patient count, where the patients were, which vehicle they were from, and I was going to put on there, and I did, which transport unit and ALS resource was associated with each patient, and what hospital they went to for making sure I wasn't, sending too many people to one hospital, or when we reached back on it, somebody walked up to Chief Blinkhorn and said, where did this person go? Right here. So while en route to the scene, I did check in with the EMS 700 and first off notified them that I wasn't taking over at 1900, and then asked about Suburban just to get an idea of how Suburban was doing. So we kept surveying the scene.
Well, I want to back up again. Sorry. Sure. So what kind of coordination was there between the two of you guys as far as, the two of you guys and Tower 18's officer, Captain Meyer, as far as was your information close to his, and you guys independently or each mutually exclusively doing your scene triage, did that create confusion, or did it have any impact at all on the event?
Was it confusing for you?
So, yeah. And I'll take ownership of that, right, because going back to my initial thought process, right, I have Captain Meyer there originally doing a really good scene assessment, doing a really good triage, feeding me a lot of information about, okay, this is how many patients I have, these are their priorities, And one of the dynamic things about these scenes is as the medics arrive and start doing their assessments, they're going to upgrade or downgrade these patients. So I had initially X number of patients which were these priorities, and that continued to change. Now I have another patient. This patient's no longer priority 1, it's priority 2. So I'm trying to adjust my units to keep up with all this. Chief first showed up, and I don't necessarily need him to come up to my vehicle to say, hey, I'm here, what do you need me to do? Because I think most EMS duty officers do a really good job of just jumping right into what their job is, right? And that's to start assisting the units on the scene, start doing their own triage. So I knew he was there. I don't know at what point him and Captain Meyer got together. But one of the things I took away from this call, right, because this was the first, I want to say, I didn't officially call it a mass casualty, and we can get to that. But I've been on a lot of car accidents, right, a lot of bad wrecks on the Beltway and so forth. But this was the first one where a lot of traumas and a lot of patients were being thrown at me very early in the event. So I'm trying to keep up with all of that. And that was my focus, right? I didn't delegate like I should have. I should have delegated, okay, I should have actually made the announcement, Chief first, to be, the disposition officer or the triage officer or whatever that ended up being, and then assigned Captain Meyer an actual role. So there was no duplication of efforts, not only between those two, but me, I'm trying to do the same thing that they're trying to do, right? I'm trying to track which units are with which patients and where those patients are being transported to, right? And it kept changing, and Chief First was doing an excellent job keeping track of that, but it was not the same information that I had, that I was trying to get over the radio transmissions. So again, one of the things I walked away from was, I need to delegate that stuff out. Just make sure that I'm getting the units that are required to this scene to him, to Captain Meyer, and let them handle assigning the medics that are showing up to specific patients, because that's what I was trying to do, right? Paramedic Engine 721 showed up. Like I had already said, okay, they're going to be assigned to X patient in the red truck. But they got grabbed in a different direction because that patient wasn't ready yet I had a trauma sitting over here on the curb. So at some point, a lot of these medics are showing up, getting pushed in different directions to different patients, which is fine. That's what they needed to do out there on this, in the scene, not from the command post.
So, Rob, would you say you had a good control of that?
No.
You did not? So when the assets, the additional EMS, the ALS assets and the transport units were arriving on the scene, you don't feel like you had good control?
I was still trying to get the total patient count.
Okay.
It took me a long time. I don't know how many minutes, but...
So ultimately is probably not the right word. So as things progressed, do you feel the providers self-assigned themselves to their patients then?
There was some self-assigning, yes.
Okay.
So,
not that anybody did anything wrong,
right.
just...
So, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, not that anyone did anything wrong. Chief Dempsey alluded to it earlier, and we're going to talk about it more later, but when we go to a building fire, right, a structure fire, it's structure. Every unit responding to the scene of that event knows what the expectation is according to the IRP, right? We do have an IRP appendix for multi-casualty responses. However, those of us that have been to those types of events, they're chaos, right? To keep it mildly, they're chaos. And you said it perfectly, Chief Blankhorn. That time of day in that neighborhood, you have people everywhere.
Yep. Those are two of our obstacles.
Well, just sorting out who are the customers
Right.
/ patients versus who are citizens either trying to help or watching. That takes a tremendous amount of effort just separating those two groups, right?
The driver of the rear vehicle here that rear-ended the gray vehicle, right? That person was 2 or 3 doors down on Kayson Street in front of their house, sitting on a chair. So I didn't know that person was a patient until Tower 18 found them. There was a pedestrian struck, and I'm saying that quote unquote because we thought the pedestrian struck originally was the driver from the blue car. There was a pedestrian that was struck with debris that was sitting on the curb who nobody knew that he was a pedestrian struck until a police officer said, hey, this guy's hurt too, right? Another obstacle that we had was the people in the red truck. There was a language barrier. right? So I couldn't walk up to them and say how many. I couldn't easily walk up to the driver who was pinned and say how many other people are supposed to be in this truck.
And where are they?
Right, and we ended up counting. Well, there's 3 total in the truck, 3 occupants, and we counted one person twice, which is where we got 7 patients instead of 6.
It's not a comfortable feeling not knowing
Right.
who needs your help and where they are.
Right.
Yeah.
So the only other things I did is I got in the vehicle with Chief Blinkhorn. He allowed me to use one of his radios to speak with EMS 700. So I moved some people, got some transport destinations around for the lower acuity traumas. So we sent the 2 higher acuity traumas to Suburban. The 2 lower acuity traumas went to MedStar, and we sent 2 to local hospitals. I think 1 Holy Cross and 1 Montgomery General. Yes, and I just tried to keep track of where everybody was going. I did assign ALS resources as they showed up. So if somebody came up to me and said, hey, like the ALS 742 showed up and they say, hey, where do you want me to go? I said, go to the person laying in the roadway, please, that human being. I did not get much past that because of trying to ensure that we got the total amount of patients, an ambulance for every patient.
And how many did you end up transporting total?
6.
6 total. Blank, back to you real quick. I'm assuming no other command officers responded to the scene?
Duty chief did.
Duty chief did.
Yep.
So question for you. Looking back, do you think it may have been advantageous to have a second command officer in the vehicle with you on this type of event?
No, if you have the amount of resources that I had with the EMS duty officer and Chief Dempsey, and a good, strong captain, like I had Captain Meyer running the scene, basically, as long as you delegate properly, which I didn't do, that scene should run smoother than this one did, right?
So that's the second or third time you said that you did not delegate properly.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I didn't really delegate anything other than Chief Dempsey to the extrication.
Was it because you felt overwhelmed, or it wasn't your?
I don't want to say I felt overwhelmed, but I was, again, my focus was, a lot like a box alarm. I want to know where the units are. Like, I looked at the patients as I would floors. I want what units are with this patient, what units are with this patient. And I couldn't keep up with that because it was a dynamic scene and that kept changing.
Yep.
And like you said, you had medics showing up, self-assigning themselves. You had other captains on the scene, hey, I need you over here. You had Chief First assigning people, so they were being pulled in different directions, and I wasn't seeing that, right? All I'm looking at is my command chart, trying to track which units are coming in, and I had a diagram of the scene and where all the patients were, and I was trying to kind of connect the dots, if you would. It just wasn't working. So I should have, after a conversation with the duty chief, assigned that duty or that role to Chief First. You maybe assigned one to, the captain had his hands full. But there were so many other captains, right? I had 5 paramedic engines show up on the scene, okay? I only needed the medic off of most of those. So at various times during the event, I had plenty of captains coming up going, hey, what do you need from us? Right? And I didn't really have anything because I just know I needed their medics. So I could have used those captains to fill some of those voids, which I didn't do. And that was one of the other takeaways.
One of the reasons I wanted to do triage is so I can move on to treatment. Running a couple of calls that were not as complex as this, the triage officer, if I assigned someone triage, then they were done, I had nothing else for them to do. So I knew if I took over triage and finished it off and had a total patient count, that I could start doing disposition.
This is going to be a strange question, but do you think because of the fact of where the event was and the how rapidly we were able to get resources there, do you think that may have hurt just a little bit? Meaning, nobody had any time to step back, to take a big look at the picture or a look at the big picture overall and say, I have this, this, and this. I need this, this, and this. When this arrives, is going there. Everything was just coming. Would that have changed anything? Like if you were in Gaithersburg or Germantown instead of where you were, where the responses would have been excellent, but just not as quick as you had on that event. Am I making sense at all?
Yeah, you mean if it was a bit more staggered?
Yes.
Possibly it might have run smoother. Again, the difficult part of this scene was it was so large, there was so much stuff going on, and there were so many masses of people. For those crews that were working the scene to try to sift through that and figure out where all these patients were, it was a challenge. And it kept changing the dynamics of the command chart, if you would. You know, that was my struggle with it. Things kept changing, which is expected.
Yeah.
Right, it's expected. And the other thing to think about on these calls, and I talked to Chief Dempsey about this, I think, afterwards, was you run a lot of these calls and you listen to them on the radio. More often than not, you're calling for additional ambulances 15, 20 minutes into the scene because patients are changing their mind, patients are being discovered. So one of my takeaways, one of my lessons learned were, hey, you know, if these crews are out there, these personnel are still out there sifting through the scene, and I'm still getting this feedback or this feeling that, hey, more patients are coming, I'm going to go a little bit heavier on the EMS units. I'm going to kind of forward stack them. So 15 minutes into the call, 20 minutes into the call, hey, we got another patient. All right, I got another ambulance, either just pulling up or sitting here waiting for them. That way I'm not calling for one 20 minutes in the incident, and they're coming from 10 stations away.
Right.
And we're having to wait 20 minutes for them to get through to the scene, so.
So I think, I know Chief Blankhorn was concerned after the incident and wanted feedback. And a slightly bigger incident, or even this incident, you could have justified, establishing, a triage officer, a treatment officer, a transport officer, and handled it like that. But it was moving so quickly, and in the end, I think we had one extra transport unit that never transported anybody, and that's what you want.
That's pretty good, yeah.
I've run these calls before where all of a sudden, 15 minutes later, somebody's like, yeah, I was in that car, and you don't have a transport unit, and you're calling deep into the incident. That didn't happen. So I know that he had concern that it ran chaotically, but I think by nature it's going to. But the job got done, and it got done very efficiently. And that, in the end, that's the measure. It's kind of like one of those incidents, you listen to it on the radio, and it sounds like total chaos. But if you're there, it really wasn't.
Right.
Or the opposite, where you listen to it on the radio, and it sounds like it's great, but when you're there, it's total chaos. So, yeah, it could have run a little bit differently. Assignments could have been made, but it just moved so quickly that it really wasn't necessary in the end. Everything kind of took care of itself.
So from the time that 18 arrived to the time that you had the final patient transported from the scene, how long of a time frame was that?
15 or 20 minutes.
I was going to say maybe 20, 25
That's
at the most.
on the outside looking in. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, like I said, it was impressive how fast the units were showing up. So we were lucky that we weren't under countywide a heavy load at the time. That would have changed some things, but we weren't. A lot of the units that were on this call were from that area, so they got there pretty quick and got out pretty quick.
Do you think if you knew the full scale of the amount of patients before you started asking for additional transport units in ALS, that would have been helpful? Because Captain Meyer got there and started asking for more people or for more resources. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't know how many patients we had yet. So if we had an idea of how many people total needed to be moved out before we started asking for more resources, would that have been easier for you to assign them as they came in? Because you knew in your head, I need to move these many people.
So I think, looking back, I think it would be best for the person that is out there actually walking through the scene and putting eyes on all the patients, being the one to assign the EMS resources as they show up is the right person to do it. It's not the person that's sitting in the command post trying to figure out where all these different priority patients are sitting and what vehicles they're in, what curbs they're on. I'll just send the EMS units to the triage officer. Mm-hmm. And let that person assign them.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha.
So I think
I look at the whole surge thing. At least for me, during the day, I don't really realize what's going on. All of a sudden, you get the email,
right,
and you realize, well, we got this giant hole, and I don't know how you would it's hard for a chief that has all kind of other things going on to pay attention that we haven't met surge yet, but boy, we're pretty close. My ambulances, they leave rescue 2. I had one leave, I didn't see it for 7 hours the other night. And it's, once you get the surge notification, then you would know and you might do actions differently. But if you're right at the edge of that surge and then suddenly you call for stuff, I don't know what we can do different with that except for count on ECC to find the resources and get them to us.
Well, I think we're an organization that heavily emphasizes continuous self-evaluation and learning. And you've said more than a few times since we've been sitting here that you could have done a much better job. Again, from the outside looking in, it sounds like the event went really, really well.
Well, definitely things. I mean, on every call, you got to walk away and say, what could I have done differently?
Yeah.
And I do that on all the calls, and this was a big one for me.
So let's do we have anything from the field yet? Let's do those, and then we'll move on to the next.
Sorry, let me get my glasses. One question said, did you ever consider assigning an EMS group or branch with the directions to set up the 3 T's, meaning triage, treatment, transport?
No, again, that my focus was on getting units to the scene and getting medics to the trauma patients. So no, at the time I didn't. In the future, that will probably happen. Yeah.
All right. Second question: would a remote staging area have helped with all the additional units? Meaning that could they just dropped off their ALS provider and then the unit continued to that location and stage unless you needed?
Yeah. So there was so much traffic, and one thing we didn't mention, and hats off to the unit officers. These paramedic engines, these ambulances were coming out of the neighborhoods, adjacent neighborhoods. They knew the traffic was bad. They were looking at their maps. They were coming up through the neighborhoods to get to the scene. So no, remote staging them probably would have had an ill effect.
I have a slide deck.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so Chief first just reminded me that he has a slide deck he'd like to present
right.
as part of the exercise.
All right. Is it live? Okay. So working with Chief Kaufman, we worked over some EMS duty officer's role on a multi-patient call, and that was one of the reasons why they sent me up here so I could make sure that everybody would be on the same page. So Chief Dempsey started off with a good segue for how we define an MCI. There's 2 categories. It's a call that taxes EMS or hospitals. So for the EMS, to tax EMS, it's variable, but as Chief Dempsey was saying, think about it's a Wednesday afternoon, and we already have 30 or 43 transport units engaged on incidents, and we're scuffling, scurrying around trying to get ambulances to clear the hospitals. Or, as Chief Cooper was saying, would say it's in Upper Montgomery or Damascus or Laytonsville, and it's taking a long time to get additional resources there. That would be another way that we could tax EMS. Also, we got to think about our hospitals. So we have specialty referral centers around that are limited in the amount of patients they can receive. So there's traumas, pediatrics, burns, hyperbaric. We have hospitals that are already on yellow. Suburban is sometimes on trauma bypass, so is MedStar. Every day, the hospitals already have very limited slack or reserve capacity, the ability to absorb 6 additional patients from one incident. So that's ways that our hospitals can be overwhelmed and cause an MCI. If you were to declare an MCI, what happens? There's an alert that goes to MIMS and the regional hospitals around that there's an MCI declared. In the Maryland Medical Protocols, we can use standing orders, which was a bigger deal before, not so big of a deal now because the Maryland Medical Protocols are set up so a lot of stuff is already standing orders because we're clinicians. Chief Kaufman gets a phone call, which he doesn't want any additional phone calls. He gets enough already. So he gets alerted. MIMS begins to form and offer up strike teams. So one of the things they'll say to Chief Kaufman is, hey, I got a BLS strike team I can send you from the Baltimore region. Well, we don't need it. We have no transport units. We don't need a strike team right now. And the hospital disaster managers are notified, so they'll get involved. I don't exactly know how nervous it makes them. I'd have to talk to Chief Graham, but they will notify. One of the things we had a problem with on this call was patient count. So we'll talk about the use of triage ribbons and tags. When I went back to the firehouse after the call, I thought, how did we lose track of the patients? How did we say we have 7 instead of 6? We didn't triage ribbon anybody. So that would have been helpful is if every person that we touched and every human being that we touched and we evaluated got a ribbon, so we didn't double count. We ended up double counting the patient in the back of the pickup truck, the rear seat passenger. And then we weren't completely sure that triage was completed on the scene yet because not every group of people standing next to cars had, triage ribbons associated with somebody there. So when did we put on triage ribbons? It really depends on the pace of the incident and how far spread out they are. So if you have a bunch of people already on, let's say we have 5 people in one car and they're all together and we can pretty much know what their priority, their acuity is, we don't really need it. But if we have people all over the place, like here at Georgia and Kayson, it would have been helpful. Triage tags are useful on slow-moving calls. Let's think like the bee swarm call they had up in, I think, 34's area when a lot of people had to be transported, but not a lot of people were acutely ill. And triage tags ribbons really have no utility on rapidly escalating or rapidly moving incidents. So we're thinking like the active assailant, right? So we just want to get the red out and keep moving. To figure out if you're going to use the triage tags, there's the 4S test: stability, severity, speed, and space. These are all yes or no questions. So for stability, is the situation or the scene stable? Severity is, are the majority of the victims immediate or critical? Because if they're all immediate, we're just going to get them moving. The speed is, can we move slowly? So, and that means, can we move slowly assembling resources, and can we move slowly getting people out of the scene? Like, for example, can we get the medical ambulance bus here and pack 10 of them on the medical ambulance bus and get them to the hospitals? And then space, is there sufficient room to operate? So if you have no to 3 of those questions out of the 4, then triage tags are likely of no utility. Chief Blinkhorn was talking about the use of the primary apparatus. So the main delivery of paramedics in Montgomery County is switching to paramedic engines, and all you need is the paramedic, as he said. So what do you do with the rest of the people? You can use them to help move patients. Moving patients is manpower intensive, requires a lot of people. You can use them to establish a treatment area. Now, that does not mean that you have to bring all of the patients into a single place to treat them, but you can divvy out the resources to make sure that you have a 1-to-1-ish patient to provider ratio with all the extra people you have on the scene. Staging manager would have been helpful, I believe, on this call. I had a shooting with multiple patients in the corridor, New Hampshire Avenue corridor, and I staged the resources away. And as the police found patients, I moved the resources into that scene. So it kept them from all coming into the scene, and it helped me ensure that each patient that the police found got a single resource, a single paramedic, and a transport unit, and that's how I did that. And then do you want to send any additional heavy apparatus or primary apparatus to the hospitals? So 10 people from 8750 Georgia Avenue self-transported to Holy Cross Silver Spring. And one of the best things that the EMS duty officer can provide to the incident commander is a patient disposition officer. We know the specialty centers We know where they are, their capabilities. We know that their capabilities vary by day and by time through EMS 700. And we can assist with distributing the patients. So the days of us calling for, whatever hospital, calling down hospitals, hey, I've got MCI, or I've got a multiple patient incident, I've got 10 patients here that are all backboarded, how many can you take, and them telling us that, those days are over. We just go through EMS 700, or when EMS 700 is active during the day, or after it's active at night, we just tell them, this is what you're getting, update your job form if you don't like that.
Another benefit of the EMS 700.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Does that conclude your
That's
slide
it.
deck?
That's my slide deck.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. So what I think I'd like to do now is, again, in the spirit of this program, is go through each one of you. We'll start with Chief Dempsey, and then Chief first, and we'll end it with Chief Blinkhorn. What you think went really well, and what you think, if you were to do it all over again, you'd do differently to prevent me from being caught in that situation. For the next one. Make sense?
Yeah, without a doubt, the end result went well, and that was kind of evident when it was all said and done. Pretty quickly, all the patients were en route to the hospital and were being treated appropriately. Yeah, we could have had a little bit different mid-level management of some of the things that did happen, but I don't have any specific, points that would have made a huge difference in this case. A little bit bigger incident, few more patients, then it might have made a big difference to make some of those designations and kind of distribute the decision-making. But otherwise, again, I think the proof was in the pudding in the end. Everybody was on the way to the hospital very quickly.
Okay. Rob?
The initial arriving unit officer was faced with a very difficult situation. He did well, requesting more resources, he did the initial triage and triaged the whole scene and got a total patient count. He did very well. Chief Blinkhorn did very well with ensuring that everybody got a paramedic and transport unit and moved off the scene. What could be done better is certainly EMS duty officers, which is my role in the scene, shouldn't show up and just self-assign them, right? They should check in. I should have checked in with Chief Blinkhorn and said, hey, what do you need me to do to make your life better right now? Instead of just saying, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do what someone else is already doing and maybe give you the incorrect information. So not self-assigning, and then...
Or what about, hey, I'm going to go do this for you, rather than... Because I'm going to look at you as a subject matter expert when you arrive on the scene of an event like that.
Sure.
So if you come up to the window and say, I'm going to go start this for you, I think that would, for me, that would flow well for me. And then I could say, well, I got 18's officer doing that. Why don't you guys link up and then come up with a plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be better.
Rather than you asking me, I don't know. What do you think?
So it's in this situation, yes, I would say, hey, do you want me to do triage? Instead of saying, this is what I'm going to do. But in a different situation, it might be, I don't need anyone to do triage. I need to just start finding places for this to go. So
and that would give him the opportunity to say, no, don't do that, do this.
Right.
Yep.
So getting a total patient count, the triage ribbons would have been very useful in this case. And telling people where they are going, like knowing, hey, the next ALS resource is going to this patient, the next transport unit is going to this patient, instead of them coming up and just getting grabbed and then going where they ended up going, not where we thought they were going to go.
Gotcha.
Yeah, before I get to my list, I want to ask, does the EMS duty officer have a preferred role? Meaning if you had to choose between treatment, transport, triage, or disposition, or just being the EMS,
Sure.
overall.
So, good question. So, we have a disposition officer 0700 to 2300 at EMS 700. So that is pretty much taken care of. So I feel like just being the EMS group supervisor would be a good spot for that, for the EMS duty officer. if you don't need them to get into the weeds and be triage or treatment officer on the jump, right? So if you had Tower 18 was already doing treatment or triage in this case, then I could have gotten the vehicle with you and then coordinated the efforts of the EMS group.
I think somebody in the vehicle with you might have helped as your mind is racing and this information is flooding in. That person that's not super engaged probably could have been helpful to give you a, hey, did you think about this kind of, look.
And that happened. I mean, the duty chief, Chief Dimitriadis, showed up. He got
Right.
in with me, and we went through some things. But yeah, so to summarize a lot of the things that I've already said, things that went well. So although my explanation made it sound like, that I felt it was kind of chaotic and unorganized from my seat, the unit officers did an excellent job moving this scene forward, right? Making good decisions. Hats off to Captain Meyer and that crew from Tower 18 because they set the tone. They had their hands full. And so, yeah, from the scene, we took care of those patients and got them out pretty efficiently. We did a really good job with that. From the command seat, right, some lessons learned. Going back to what the question was in the chat there, had I have to do this again, I would take some of that off my plate because I was trying to be essentially the, I'll say, treatment and transport officer from the command post, right? I was trying to assign units as they were showing up to patients. I need to let somebody that's in the scene do that. So, as we alluded to, we got a lot of captains coming on these paramedic engines that don't have an assignment. That can be divvied out to some of them. That way, it's a bit more of an organized scene. Yeah.
All right. Good stuff. I'm going to end it on sometimes you just don't have the luxury to take the time to get as organized as you'd like to be. And all in all, it sounds like the event went excellent. So, job well done again. At this point, we're going to pass it off to Chief Davis to close us out. Thanks, guys.
Chiefs, thank you very much for being willing to share your story. Hope the goal of the program, right, is to learn some of the behind the scenes, the decisions, what was encountered, decisions made at our various incidents. And we always enjoy hearing from the folks who ran the incident from the command staff perspective. So thanks for doing that. Thank you, Chief Cooper, for being our moderator. Does a great job, as always. Couple reminders. If you needed COPDI hours, remember to do that on the form that's on the website. Command competencies, still plenty of room to sign up for that. Try to get those signed up so the fellows don't have to schedule a session and then cancel that. Future episodes, we are going to reschedule the battery fire one. You should see that announcement coming out as soon as we finalize that date. Hopefully that'll be in the second half of October. And then we'll probably have part 2 of the building construction one either in November or December. A couple other things in the hopper out there, but right now that's what that looks like. So really that's all we have today from today's episode of From the Command Post. Until next time, be safe out there.